Chelik Chav Gimel, volume 23, the second Sicha for Shavuos. This Sicha will discuss the halacha that obligates one to eat and drink on the festival of Shavuos, and forbids one to fast under any circumstance, even a tainis cholom, which would otherwise be permitted under certain circumstances on Shabbos and Yontif, on the other Yom Tovim. Also in the Sicha, we'll learn to appreciate the great novelty and accomplishment of what took place on Har Sinai when Hashem gave us the Torah. In order to better appreciate the Sicha and to be able to flow through it, we'll introduce the concept of lachem. Lachem literally means, quote, to you. Going to the Gemara in Meseches Psachim on Samaches Amud Beis, 68b. Over there the Gemara says that there's a machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Eliezer says that a person on Yom Tov, on any of the festivals, can choose. Either they can eat and drink, or they should sit and learn, Yoshev V'Shaina. In other words, you're not obligated to eat. There's no obligation to eat. You can choose. However, Rabbi Yeshua says no. You must equally divide it. There has to be a component, half, meaning part of it has to be for eating and drinking, and chetzioi leveisa medrash, and the other half you spend in the study hall, learning, davening, and so on. So the Gemara continues, and he says, Rabbi Yochanan gives us insight into what's behind the basis of this debate. See, there are two verses. In Devarim, in Deuteronomy, chapter 16, verse 8, it says, in reference to the festivals, Atzeres Lashem Elikecha, that this is an assembly for Hashem, your God. Whereas in Bamidbar, in the book of Numbers, chapter 29, verse 35, it says, in reference to the festivals, Atzeres Tia Lochem, it shall be an assembly to you. And therefore, Rabbi Eliezer understands this to be that this is giving us an option. It's either this or that. Both are true, both are okay. Whereas Rabbi Yeshua says, no, this is telling us that both of them are equally important. Both of them are absolute components of the observance of the festivals. The Gemara continues and concludes with the following, that Rabbi Eliezer says, Hakol moedim ba'atzeres de'be'inanam lechem, that in fact everybody agrees, meaning even Rabbi Eliezer, that when it comes to Shavuos, when it comes to Atzeres, everybody agrees that there has to be a component of, quote, lachem, to you, which means there has to be eating and drinking. So why, he says, my timer, what's the reason? Because this is Yom Shenitten by Torah, this is the day which the Torah was given. So that's one thing to be familiar with. Another thing, what is this idea of a tainis cholom? A fast for a bad dream that you're allowed to fast on Shabbos. So the rule is that on Shabbos and Yom Tov you have to eat. There are seudos, there are meals that one has to partake in. However, if one wakes up Shabbos morning and had a terrible nightmarish dream, which it throws them into a scare, and the only way they find perhaps that they could improve it, meaning they can sweeten it, so to speak, is by fasting, which is a form of prayer. Says the halacha, there's a waiver, there's room in halacha that if one absolutely feels that he absolutely needs to do so, one is allowed to fast even on Shabbos. What is the reasoning behind it? In other words, what's the reason that one is given this waiver, this allowance? The answer is because the idea of eating on Shabbos is oineg. You karasel Shabbos oineg. You're supposed to have pleasure on Shabbos. And the Chachamim deemed it to be through eating and drinking. Well, for this person, quote, as it says in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, since he is in such distress, he is so distraught, for him, this is something which is pleasure. For him, this fasting is soothing him and gives him that hope that he can improve the dream, and therefore for him, this is considered to be einig, and therefore it's allowed on Shabbos. Let's go into the Sicha. So, the Chag HaShavuos, the festival of Shavuos, is distinguished from all and different than all the other festivals. How so? In the fact, as we quoted before from the Gemara, that Hakol Moedim, everybody agrees, everybody concurs that on Shavuos, you have to have the component of lochem. It has to be to you, you have to eat and drink. Which means that all the festivals, there is a debate whether you need to absolutely eat or not. But on Shavuos, everybody agrees that you have to eat and drink. Why? This is to express your joy in the fact and to show that you're happy about, you're content with the fact that Hashem gave the Torah to us Jewish people. Now, in actuality, the halacha is that on all the festivals there has to be lochem, meaning on Sukkot, on Pesach, you have to eat and you have to make a point to also have what we would call bodily pleasure. Yet, there's still a difference between Shavuos and the other festivals. In other words, Shavuos is still distinguished, even though the halacha is that on all festivals one must eat. How so? On all the other festivals, including Shabbos, if one feels compelled to fast, as we said in the introduction, a tainas cholim, for that person, this is, quote, his pleasure at the moment, because they're in such a distraught state, the person is allowed to fast. Whereas on Shavuos, even if somebody had a terrible dream, and even if they think that this will help them feel better and have, quote, better pleasure or more pleasure, still, they're not allowed to fast. They must eat. There is no waiver on Shavuos for not eating. Now, if you think about it, one can ask the following question. It would seem that if you analyze it, Pesach and Sukkot, the other major festivals, actually come about and they celebrate miracles or a physical aspect of things. How so? The miracles that happen on Pesach and Sukkot relate to the physical redemption of the Jewish people, the exodus from Egypt, Yetzias Mitzrayim, or Sukkot commemorates Hashem's protection of us, not the protection of the soul, but the protection of the bodies, that we were kept protected from the elements in the desert. Whereas Shavuos, what is Shavuos all about? Shavuos celebrates the giving of the Torah, which is a very spiritual thing. So how come Pesach and Sukkot, you can get away with not having that physical pleasure, if it suits you at the moment? Whereas Shavuos, which is really a spiritual a celebration of the spiritual, yet there is no waiver, there is no allowance for not eating on this special festival. In order to understand this, says the Rebbe, we'll take a moment first to explain, to get a better appreciation of the general concept, the general idea, the geder of the obligation of having oineg on Shabbos and Yontiv, having pleasure on Shabbos and Yontiv. The main aspect, the core obligation of oineg on Shabbos and Yontiv, as instituted by the sages, is through eating and drinking. To such a point, this goes so far, that the rule is that if somebody actually did fast on Shabbos and Yontiv, in other words, somebody following the halacha, they had a tainas cholim, remember the halacha makes that special waiver, but yet, once you fasted that tainas cholim on Shabbos, you didn't eat it on Shabbos, you have to now fast another day, sometime during the week, in order to atone, in order to make up for the fact that you didn't eat on Shabbos and Yontiv. In other words, in the one hand you will give him that waiver, but in the other hand, there is something deficient, there's something wrong with the fact that this person didn't eat on Shabbos Yontiv. And this brings out the point that the ikar ha'onig of Shabbos Yontiv, the mainstay of the pleasure, quote unquote, of Shabbos Yontiv is through food. Moreover, there's only the waiver, the allowance to fast on Shabbos Yontiv is only in specifically a tainas cholim, a tainas for a bad dream, or if somebody just has a hard time eating, meaning that eating will bring him pain. Let's say somebody's extremely nauseous, or somebody's not feeling well, or if somebody, has been fasting for so long that changing the course and suddenly eating will actually do more bad to them, more harm to them than good, will make them feel uncomfortable. But otherwise, let's say, for example, if somebody wishes to fast for spiritual reasons, spiritual purposes, let's say to fast a fast of tshuva, that you're not allowed to do on Shabbos. That you cannot do on Shabbos. In other words, if it's a spiritual pleasure, you can't do. If somehow you can explain it as a physical pleasure, then you have that allowance. Now here's the question. Since the underlying basis for this whole thing that you have to eat, and I'm sorry, the whole thing that you're allowed to fast, the whole idea that you're allowed to fast in certain instances on Shabbos and Yom Tov is because, quote, of pleasure, this is your particular pleasure at the time, then the question is, why did the Chachamim establish all of this dafka specifically connected with and tied in with eating and drinking? In other words, why didn't they just establish that one needs to have oineg on Shabbos, pleasure on Shabbos, whatever the pleasure means to you. If for you it means to eat and drink, eat and drink. If it means for you to fast right now because you want to do tshuva, because you want to lift yourself up higher in the spiritual realms, and you feel you can achieve that, you can attain that through fasting, so be it. Why did they insist? Why did the sages insist that the oineg can be expressed, the pleasure can be expressed only through eating and drinking? The answer is as follows. Torah and mitzvahs were given to us. Who's us? Neshamas begufim. The souls as they are in the body. It wasn't given to the souls as they are in heaven, but as they are down here in body. And the fact is that the neshama itself, the soul itself, doesn't really need any correction. It doesn't really need any of this. Rather, why does the neshama come down to this world? In order to come into the body and to help elevate the body. And therefore, in other words, since it's all about the body, the whole focus of Torah and mitzvahs is about bringing the body and elevating it towards Hashem through the soul being in the body. What is the natural pleasure of everybody? Your typical body, most people, is through eating and drinking. And therefore, the Torah establishes that the main way, the only way, or perhaps you can say the primary way in expressing oineg, pleasure, is through eating and drinking on Shabbos and Yom Tov. However, let's take, for example, a tinus of tshuva. Let's say somebody wants to fast to elevate themselves spiritually through tshuva. That is not a physical pleasure. That is a pleasure for the soul. That is a spiritual pleasure. And even if you would make the argument, no, that the body itself also enjoys it. The person is so refined, so elevated, that the body also enjoys fasting for tshuva. That is not true, because that's not natural for the body. That is almost like imposed on the body, either through coercion or through avodah, through dominance over the body, but it isn't natural to your typical body that it should enjoy not eating. A body enjoys eating. And therefore, you're not allowed to fast on a Shabbos and a Yom Tov for spiritual purposes like tshuva and so on. Now, as we said before, just to reemphasize, even a tinus chalom, even a fast of a bad dream, where here the body is involved, and the body wants to fast because the body feels scared about whatever it saw in the dream, even there's a waiver for it, there's allowance for it, but it's not optimal. And that's why after Shabbos you have to make it up by fasting again. Therefore, it could be suggested that an interesting thing, says the Rebbe, just a beautiful kind of nuance, a remes, if I may, that typically whenever it's presented, this idea that one is allowed to fast on Shabbos and Yom Tov in certain circumstances, it's always brought out as a tinus chalom. That means the general title for this allowance, for this waiver, is called the fasting of a tinus chalom. Even though it's not only a tinus chalom, it could also be other instances, as I mentioned before, in which a person feels discomfort or nauseous or whatever it is, and therefore they're allowed not to eat on Shabbos. Why is it, says the Rebbe, just an interesting premise, an interesting hint that we can find in this, that it's always brought out as the concept of the idea of fasting a tinus chalom. Says the Rebbe, the whole idea that the body does not want to properly fulfill the oineg of Shabbos as it's been established to the Chachamim to be through eating and drinking, this is already this is the idea of a dream. What is a dream? Think about it. A dream is being in a state removed from reality. If you think about it, when a person goes to sleep, what happens? Their cognitive brain goes to sleep. It's dormant. What's working? What's functioning? It's the imaginative part of the brain. And that's why we can have these weird dreams where two opposites can simultaneously seem to be right and fit in together when really it makes no sense. It doesn't make sense in real life. You can be in two different places in your dream, or you can jump from one end of the world to the other end of the world, because what's working is your imagination. But true reality is not ticking, is not working. So what is this? How do we apply this? The neshama, this is like a spiritual dream. The neshama, if it's in tune, and it should be in tune with what it really has to do, and that's really the true reality. It's the true reality is the neshama. The true reality is to do what Hashem wants to do. The true reality is when it comes to Shabbos and Yom Tov and Hashem calls for to have oinek, to have pleasure, that's what you want to have. How could it be that the body should somewhat put up in opposition to it? The body should feel uncomfortable with it? Is because you're in a state of sleep, in a state of slumber. You're like in a dream state. The imagination is what's really working, meaning not the true reality. The true reality of the neshama, that is dormant, and therefore the person comes to a state where they don't want to eat, and they feel actually that they're going to have more pleasure in not eating on Shabbos Yom Tov than eating. Because if you think about it, how is it possible that a Yid, even the body, should not want to comply, should not feel this urgency in falling into line exactly with halacha, exactly whatever the will is that Hashem has for the Yid. And we're not talking about a Yid who's not observant, somebody who doesn't keep Torah mitzvahs. Okay, rather we're talking about a Yid who keeps Torah mitzvahs ordinarily. How is it possible to be in such a concealed state, in such a manner, where your body is not allowing you to enjoy food and wants you to enjoy the opposite? That's because you're in a state of sleep, in a state of dream. And based on all of this that we just explained, again, to summarize, that the main expression of Oineg and Shabbos and Yom Tov is through eating, but ultimately it's about the Oineg, about the pleasure. We'll appreciate that on Shavuos, there is no such waiver for this even tainis chalon. Because as we said, the idea that a Yid should not have pleasure from eating and drinking is really being in a state of a dream. It means that the body and the soul are not really fully connected, and they're not really fused together in the most optimal manner. You see, if we think about it, what really is the chidush? What really was the great novelty of the revelation by Matan Torah, revelation of godliness? What really happened there, what really was accomplished, is that godliness was revealed to the extent that it permeated the entire creation. As the Chazal say, as they express it, it says, quote, even birds didn't chirp, no cows moved, and the entire world was silent and still and totally absorbing. Every aspect of creation was absorbing the words that Hashem said, the revelation of godliness. In fact, there's another great miracle that took place, but it's not a miracle actually. The Rebbe explains it elsewhere. It's a totally natural expression, a natural result of what happened by Matan Torah, and that is that there were no echoes. You think about it, Hashem's storming voice was so loud it should have echoed off the mountains. Why did it not echo off the mountains? Because it got absorbed in the mountains. Even in the stone of the mountains, it got absorbed. What is an echo? When something bounces off, it doesn't get absorbed. Torah, or better yet, the revelation of godliness that happened by Matan Torah permeated the entire world. How did this happen? How is it possible that godliness can permeate each and every aspect of the world, even a stone? The answer is because the revelation that took place in Matan Torah was that the atzmus of Hashem, the essence of Hashem, as we say in the word Anoichi. Anoichi stands for Anon Nafshi Ksavos Yavdes. Hashem said, I myself, as he starts, Anoichi, I revealed myself. Now, atzmus, essence, is the true infinity. It has no limitations. Nothing can stop it. Nothing can bar it. And therefore, there is no place in the world that the revelation of godliness did not reach it, did not permeate it. And that's what we celebrate on Shavuos. On Shavuos, that's what we're celebrating. However, on Pesach and Sukkot, which were only certain revelations of certain levels of godliness, well, meaning Oiros and Giluyim, certain Oiros and certain revelations, well, that leaves room for some kind of, quote, dream. That leaves room that in some spot, in some place, or to some extent, to a certain extent, it has an effect and it permeates and it affects it and it illuminates it. But then there's parts which remain, so to speak, dark. It doesn't reach it. But the Simcha for Torah, which we celebrate on Shavuos, there is absolutely no hester whatsoever. It permeates and it reaches every madrega, every one of the levels, even the lowest levels. And this reach is even in the quote, in the world of dreams, in the realm of dreams, that even there's no obstacles in any whatsoever way, and therefore the halacha is that on Shavuos there's absolutely no fasting, and one must eat and drink to express this idea that the godliness came to permeate, to make its revelation into the lowest of levels, and that the neshama is down here in the guf, that the ultimate purpose is the guf, the Torah and mitzvahs of the guf.